observe onto the dirt hiking trail. I felt I had more energy running at night too. It was weird, I don't know how to describe it. There were no lights at all, it was all just nature. There was also a dead body that came up in the previous week in the preserve, but I didn't really let that concern me too much since I live in one of the safest neighborhoods in the state. It was also a weeknight, so ping pong balls, and I paid my older brother, who was 21, to pick up a bunch of beers and liquor. The good thing about my house was that it was in a cul-de-sac, and it had a plot of land dedicated to water collection. Opportunity to throw an end-of-the-year party. I went to the store and bought 3 big bags of red Solo cups and a bag of ping pong balls, and I paid my older brother, who was 21, to pick up a bunch of beers and liquor. The good thing about my house was that it was in a cul-de-sac, and it had a plot of land dedicated to water collection right behind the backyard, so the chances of a noise complaint were slim. My older brother invited like 10 friends of his own. People started showing up around 9. I basically made it open invite to most people in my grade. By the peak of the night, there were probably 60 to 70 kids in my house. It was more insane than I thought it would be. It got to a point where I started seeing kids I didn't know coming into my house. At that point, I had to put my foot down and start locking the door to avoid randoms from coming in. Every time people would leave, I'd lock the door again. Later in the night, when there were about 20 kids left in my house, my good friend Peter asked me about the guy who went to the upstairs of my house. I questioned what he was talking about, and he told me there was some random guy walking up my stairs about a minute ago. I intended on leaving the upstairs off limits, as the only rooms up there are bedrooms. I ran upstairs and checked all of the bedrooms, which all had the lights off. I checked my bedroom last, which appeared to be empty too. I went back to tell Peter. He said with 100% certainty that someone was still up there. So this time he came up with me to check all of the rooms again, under all the beds and all the closets, but whoever this kid was that Peter saw didn't turn up, so we went back downstairs. I figured Peter was drinking too much and just had no credibility that night. He was one of the few people who I'd be letting crash at my house that night. In fact, Peter crashed on a couch before everyone even left. It was probably 2 in the morning by the time the last of my friends left. My brother was already asleep in his room upstairs, while Peter and my other friend John slept on the couches downstairs. I went upstairs to the bathroom, exhausted but feeling satisfied with the party. As I brushed my teeth and looked at myself in the mirror, through a slight blur from drinking so much, I thought I heard something above me. I turned off my electric toothbrush and listened for the longest time, but there was nothing now. I rinsed up and went to my room, but before I could even crash into bed, I heard another sound from above me. A thump in the ceiling. I went to my brother's bedroom door, but no matter how much I knocked, he wouldn't open his door. I suddenly had the thought to check the attic. For some reason, it took me that long. I got the hook to pull down the stairs to the attic. I'd never actually been in that attic before. After climbing up the stairs into the darkness, I felt around above the floor of the attic and searched for some kind of light switch. My hand knocked into a string, so I pulled it down, and a single dim light flickered on. The center of the attic, where the door was lit nicely by this light, but the outer walls of the attic were all dark. But even in the darkness, I could sense another presence in there. I asked, "Is anybody in here?" And I felt a rush when I saw a box close to the corner fall over, and behind it was someone crouching behind another stack of boxes. It didn't look like a kid, it looked like an adult man, and at the same time, I could hear a plastic bag being brushed up against in another corner of the attic behind me. I jumped off the stairs and slammed the attic door shut. I ran down to my 2 friends to tell them what happened. It took a bit of waking them up for them to fully comprehend what I was screaming at them. Peter told me to call the cops right away, and I did. I guess I needed that second opinion of what to do before actually calling the police. I went back upstairs with my 2 friends to pound on my brother's door, but he still wouldn't answer. I started to worry that something might have happened to him. Cop sirens blared outside, so the three of us ran downstairs in relief. An officer and his partner came in and asked where the attic was. I led them to the attic door and opened it for them. They did their thing. They went up with lights in one hand and guns drawn in the other. We were told to wait down in the living room, and not even 2 minutes later, the cops came out of the attic with two men who looked to be in their 30s or 40s, and they were disgusting and dangerous looking. Likely homeless and probably crazy as well. They gave us looks as they walked past us. My brother came out of his room soon after to throw up, and when I explained everything to him, he said he slept right through our knocks and bangs on the door. Thankfully, since my brother was 21, he served as the adult in the situation and talked with the police. Because of that, we were able to keep the incident a secret from our parents. I used to go to the University of Idaho before transferring. In my sophomore year, I went to a lot of frat parties. There was one frat party that changed the way I look at college parties, however. I'm gonna leave the name of the frat out of this story, but one of the smaller frats on our campus was having an open party. Free for girls and a $20 charge at the door for guys, so we all had to pay the cover charge. When we got inside, there were definitely a lot of people, but the party overall seemed kind of grimy and sketchy. There were a lot more guys than girls, and it was insanely hot in the house. There seemed to be a couple guys going to a back room, so I figured I'd check it out to see if anything was going on back there. After going through a door to a much quieter section of the house, I saw the same couple of guys go outside. I figured I'd go outside and check out what the party was looking like in the backyard section. When I opened the back door and peered outside, I saw the two guys standing around a fire pit. There was no one else in the backyard. They looked over to me after hearing the door open, I guess, and before I could turn and go back inside, they waved me over. I felt awkward, and I probably should have ignored them and just went back inside, but I felt pressured into walking over to them. They told me to sit down on one of the logs placed around the fire pit. I did so. Then they sat down on two logs and started to light up cigarettes. The two of them sat there not saying a word, just smoking their cigarettes and looking in my general direction. They didn't say anything or even offer me a cigarette. I figured I'd try to start conversation since they called me over, and asked them if they were in the frat. One of them shook their head no, and that was it. I then asked if they knew anybody at this party. This time I didn't even get an acknowledgement of my question. The two just looked at each other and then they looked at me. Now that they were looking at me, they wouldn't look away, and I was becoming increasingly uneasy. One of the two said in a very monotone, slow voice, "That's a nice watch." I looked at the cheap $30 Timex watch on my wrist. It was not a nice watch at all, but maybe to him it looked like one. That same guy got up, and as he started walking over to me, said, "Give me your watch."
There's a better way to make changes to the work schedule. Try when I work.
Odysseus, don't you want to remember?
My house doesn't have a basement, and a lot of houses that don't have basements have crawl spaces instead, which are basically a layer of space under the lower level of a house with a height of no more than about 5 feet, usually used for storage. It started on a night like any other. I had classes the next morning, so I had to be in bed early. My room is on the first floor, and the crawl space is right below my room. After turning off the TV at like 11, I started hearing noises below me. Actually, it sounded like it was coming from right under my bed. My parents and brother were all asleep by now, so calling for any of their attention would be a little obnoxious at this point. I took a little courage, but I got on the carpet on my knees and looked under the bed, hoping I wouldn't see a rodent or any other kind of creature. There was nothing though, so I got back into bed. As I got back into bed though, the sound started up again. It was kind of a rough push and pull kind of sound. It sounded like something being done deliberately. I once again got on my knees on the side of the bed and looked underneath. There was definitely nothing under there though. Oddly enough, every time I got out of bed, the sound stopped. I went to get my dad, and he took a look under the bed too. Figures there were no sounds now though. He told me he'd check the crawl space the next day to see if one of the pipes were leaking or something. I didn't even think of it being something in the crawl space. The rest of that night it was quiet, so I fell asleep with ease. When I got home from class the next day, I spotted something sticking out from under my bed. I pulled it out, and it was a bag full of old papers from like elementary school. I planned on asking my mom why she would put that in my room, but I figured I'd just throw it back down in the crawl space and forget about it. Our crawl space has its entry door inside of our garage, and my dad tends to leave the garage door open a lot during the summer months. This was so he could work in there without having the lights on while also getting some fresh air. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to sounds coming from below my room. Not my bed this time. For some reason, the sounds were especially clear this night. I knew now something had to be in the crawl space. After turning on my bedside lamp, I ran to get my dad out from bed. He was a bit irritated that I'd woken him up. He led me down to the garage and to the crawl space door. He opened the door and grabbed the flashlight that hung next to the door. As we looked inside of the crawl space, however, we noticed something strange. Light. Across the other side of the area. Light was seeping in from above. But that made no sense. There weren't supposed to be any holes in the floor. My dad crouch walked his way to the hole. And then he screamed. Hearing my dad scream with such fear and horror was the most disturbing thing I'd ever witnessed. I didn't know what he saw, but he screamed at me to open the garage door and get out of the house. I listened without asking questions. I stood in the driveway waiting. I heard a commotion inside of the house, including a scream from my mom. 5 minutes later, my dad and older brother came outside, holding a stranger in their grips. 5 minutes later, a police car pulled up to the house, and neighbors soon started coming outside to see what the commotion was. Let me explain what happened. When my father got to that hole in the ceiling of the crawl space, he realized there was a giant hole cut open right under my bed, and as he looked through it, he saw a masked man looking down at him. As my dad grabbed at the man's arms through the hole, he screamed for my older brother's help, who luckily came to my dad's aid. Without him, my dad could have easily been killed, because that man was carrying a handgun. When I was 21, still living in my parents' house, my bedroom was actually supposed to be considered an extra room. It wasn't built with the intention of being a bedroom, more so a kind of downstairs storage room. However, I was the youngest, so I got the worst room. My 2 older brothers had already moved out by this point, and I was finishing up with college. It was winter break, however. My dad was on a business trip, and my mom was in another state with friends. They're the kind of parents who you never see around, and they've been like that since we were kids. My room happens to attach to the crawl space of our house. There's a little pull-out door in the wall. When I was little, my brothers always teased me and said there were aliens or monsters in the crawl space. Sometimes as a kid, I'd get scared by the littlest of noises coming from inside the wall next to my bed. Eventually, I outgrew that fear, obviously. I was chilling in my room, just trying to finish up all the work for my classes, when I heard some muffled noise coming from the crawl space, like literally beyond the wall right next to my bed. It wasn't any kind of thumping or tapping or anything. It just sounded like some kind of sound that would come from the person's mouth. Of course, my heart started racing as I started freaking out over it. Given that I was home alone, I couldn't just call for my huge, intimidating dad to go in there. So I opened the door to the crawl space, and with my phone's flashlight, just aimed it in every direction in the crawl space while still standing by the doorway. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but after not being able to see anything or anyone from the doorway, I contemplated going deeper into the crawl space. But just then, there was a voice.
Was I making plans, sir? Right. Sometimes I talk too much. But let me tell you something right now.
After nearly having a heart attack, I realized it was just one of those old talking Bubba toys. I didn't know what could have caused it to go off and start speaking, though. I was guessing it was deep in some old bag of toys somewhere, and something was putting pressure on the trigger button. I waited by the door for the talking to stop, and when it finally did, I shut the attic door again and got back in my bed. When the time came for me to go to sleep, I turned off my laptop and the light and rolled on my side. It wasn't long after that I heard the talking Bubba go off again inside the crawl space. Now that I knew what the sound was, it seemed much clearer. This was the last straw now. I had to get that toy out from whatever bag it was sitting in, or it would probably be going off all night. I went back to the crawl space door, and this time actually went inside. I followed the sounds of the toy's voice. As I got to the big brown paper bag that seemed to be containing it, I saw two arms come out from the dark. Two arms that were stretched out forward, and there was a horrifying, deep scream that accompanied them. I was being lunged at. I screamed as I ran to the crawl space door and slammed it shut. It had a lock on it, thank God. A couple seconds after locking the door, there were bangs on the door that consistently came about every 2 seconds. The door didn't show any signs of giving, but I didn't stick around to find out if it would. I was upstairs already on the phone with the police, and I did notice the banging stopped downstairs. The police told me to wait either inside a locked room or outside in a safe place like a car or a neighbor's house. I didn't want to be in the house anymore until the cops arrived, so I took the spare keys to my car from the key ring and went to sit in my car. I had a view of the back section of my house from the street, however, and noticed the door on the side of our house was open. It was the outside crawl space door. It was completely wide open. It suddenly made sense how there could be someone in there. The outside door must have been left unlocked by my dad by mistake. I sat in my car telling 911 to hurry up before the intruder could escape. I didn't see anyone leave through the door, but for all I knew, they already had left. The cop car finally came roaring down the road with its lights on and stopped in front of my house. I got out of the car and called at him to follow me to the door. I pointed and said, "In there," and he went inside with his flashlight. I peeked my head in there the whole time, helping out with the flashlight too. I made sure he didn't miss anything. I even suggested that he search any big boxes or bags, and he did. The officer was surprisingly patient and polite towards my demands given the situation. He came out after a few minutes of searching and assured me the crawl space was empty. Whoever was in there left in a hurry. The crawl space door could only be locked with a key or from the inside, so I asked the officer to wait there while I went inside and locked the door from the inside. As I was in the crawl space again, alone, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that I was being watched as I hurried back to my room to lock that door as well. The officer left a few minutes after, and I tried to get to sleep, but I couldn't. I was awake all night until the sun came up, just worrying about someone stoking in that crawl space. Luckily, no one ever broke into it again, but I guess I wouldn't call it breaking in, since the door was unlocked. It was 2016. I had just signed a lease to move into my first house alone. It was a fixer-upper starter home for sure, but the neighborhood wasn't bad at all, really. By the first day, I had the house layout memorized. By the third day, I was settled in. However, by the fourth day, I started to hear some weird house noises. There was a small upstairs where the 2 bedrooms and a bathroom were. The first floor was just the living room, dining room, and kitchen. When I was upstairs, I never heard the sounds. However, when I was downstairs, I'd start to hear noises come from below the floor at later hours of the night. There was a small basement, technically, but it was just one little room meant to serve as a laundry room. I went down there to see if the noise could be coming from down there. There was no one down there in that room. I could still hear noises coming from inside the wall. I felt around the wall to see if there was any kind of hollowness, and in fact there was. That meant there was some kind of room on the other side. I looked to the corner of the basement, where there was a small opening that went deeper than the rest of the room. I went over to look at it, what I assumed to be just a tight space that could be used for storage, and learned there was actually a door in that tiny opening. A door that seemed to lead to some kind of crawl space area. I opened the door, which just barely cleared the tiny opening, and looked inside, but it was way too dark to go in there. Plus, whatever the noise was seemed to stop. I could tell just based off the very front of the space, however, that the ceiling was just tall enough to walk under, maybe with a slight crouching of step. There was no way I was looking around there at night anyway, so I shut that door, went upstairs, and locked the basement door just in case, you know. I called it a night shortly after. The next few days, things were normal. One night, I heard a sound or two when I was in the basement doing laundry, but I was starting to think it was just some kind of noises that had to do with the boiler system or whatever. The next night, however, while I was in the living room, I heard thumps hitting the floor. 3 distinct thumps, actually. Now my adrenaline was rushing, and I was positive I had someone in my house. I went into defense mode and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I had and stormed downstairs. I tried to make myself angry as I approached the crawlspace door. I turned on my flashlight, opened the door, and started screaming with anger, or what I wanted to seem like anger. But really, I was shaking in my own skin as I entered that dark, cold crawlspace. It was completely empty except for what seemed to be 2 empty boxes. I must have done a complete 360, analyzing the space at least 5 times, and I knew for a fact there wasn't anything or anyone in there. Then, however, something broke the absolute silence. It was a sound that was coming from no further than like 20 feet away from me. It was the sound of breathing. In a panic, I looked in the direction of the breathing, and was horrified to see something standing in the corner of the space. I didn't know what to think, but I knew it couldn't be a real person, because I'd looked around at least 5 times and saw nobody in there just a second ago. As I stood there, frozen, I started to feel like the figure in the corner was getting closer to me. That's when I ran for the crawlspace door. When I made it outside, I looked around for something to block the door with. I found nothing, and so I ran upstairs and locked the door. That night I went to sleep at my parents' house, and the next day I harassed the landlord to let me out of the lease given what I had just experienced. It took a lot of arguing, but I managed to get out of that house within the same week. All that week, however, I stayed out in the basement, but I did continue to hear noises from down below when I was in the living room. I work as an Uber Eats driver at night to make a little extra cash. Friday and Saturday nights are always the busiest because everyone's either home or with friends and ordering food, so those were usually the nights I would work. I got a request on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. to pick up McDonald's for a guy named Kyle. He lived a few minutes away from my current position, so I punched in the nearest McDonald's, which was like a 2-minute drive away, and picked up his order. It was a small order. I think he only wanted 2 hamburgers. He lived like 5 to 7 minutes away from the McDonald's. I followed the app's directions to the house, and eventually it led me to a short dead-end street that veered off another dead-end street. The house was the last one on this dead-end road. It sat right next to a line of trees that ran alongside a highway that was pretty much dead at this hour. Given how late of an hour it was, I didn't want to ring the bell, so I called this Kyle guy's number. It rang once, then went to voicemail, so I hung up. Then I got a text from him though. He told me to come to the door, and so I did. I got to the big wooden front porch of the house, and soon the front door opened. A bald guy opened the door, only he didn't look very old. He looked to be in his 30s, yet his head was completely bald. Maybe he was sick or just liked that look, so I didn't judge. However, his breath was disgusting, and he seemed to be quite drunk, so that was a little off-putting. The payments were done through the app, so usually there was no need to wait around for money. But this time, this Kyle guy asked me to come put the pizza on his kitchen table while he ran to fetch a tip. I didn't object to free money, so I waited in his kitchen, which by the way was only lit up by a small outlet-sized nightlight, so it was pretty dim in there. The whole kitchen smelled rather disgusting though. I didn't know what it was. Kyle was taking awfully long down the basement fetching this tip, so I started to wander a bit. I stepped into the living room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. The TV was on in there, which was the only reason I could see anything. However, the stench was even greater in this room. Then I noticed that the back door was slit half open. Maybe he was airing out whatever that putrid odor was. For the hell of it, I walked to the back door, expecting to get a quick breath of fresh air, but the smell only got worse. Then, finally, I stepped outside onto the man's back deck. I heard flies. The sound of a swarm of flies right by the door. Then, I guess a motion-sensing light saw my movement and turned on, revealing 2 big black garbage bags stuffed with 2 long objects. The smell was unbearable, too. It took me a second to catch on to what I was most likely looking at. Suddenly, waiting around for the tip didn't seem like a good idea anymore. I went back inside and rushed to the front door, and just then I heard Kyle emerge from the basement calling to me, waving a few singles in his hand. He saw me as I was about to open the door and asked where I was going. I had to come up with something, so I said I was just rushing to check if I had something in my car. He said, "Oh, okay," as he came over to me and handed me the bills. Then he turned to the back door, to the porch, where the light was still on. Then he looked back at me, with his gummy smile now disappearing. He asked me in a firm voice if I went to his backyard. I told him no, and he just stared at me, not saying anything. I didn't give any fucks anymore. I opened the door and walked myself out, but not without him grabbing my shoulder as I got onto the stoop. I yanked his hand off my shoulder and ran to my car. I saw him run back inside with the front door still open. I turned my car on, but I sat and watched his front door, curious to see if he'd come back out, and he did. He came back out running full speed for my car with a big metal rod in his hand. I drove away from his house, ready to call the police and report him. I called when I got down the block, making sure to leave him no time to dispose of those potentially dead bodies. I waited down the block and saw police cars pull up literally within 2 minutes. I watched the whole thing as I told police where to go. In fact, Kyle, if that's his real name, had already started moving the bed, which did contain dead bodies, to the bushes in his backyard. Everything about this guy was off. For leaving the back door open to reveal dead bodies to a pizza delivery boy may have been deranged, but he also wasn't the smartest man around. I deliver food for an Asian eatery in my town. It's the best gig I could get at my age, simply for the tips alone. My friend and I work there together. We're actually the only two who are an Asian. My friend usually works the counter and takes phone calls. I usually do deliveries, and that's the way I like it. My friend got off the phone during one night shift we had together and told me I'd be doing a delivery. After the food was prepared, I was handed a brown paper bag and I was off on my way. The address I was given led me to some small dirt driveway off the main road, onto an enclosed property. Don't picture it as some luxurious private property though. It was some old, unkempt excuse of the property. And the house seemed to be closed off given that there wasn't a single light on in there, and how high the grass was. I called my friend back at the restaurant, and he gave the phone to our boss. Unfortunately, our boss is a stinge, so he yelled at me in his thick Asian accent to knock on the door and don't waste the food. I got out from my car and felt grass rubbing against my shins. That's how tall it was. I went up the 3 stairs to the front door and knocked really loud since there didn't seem to be a doorknob. As I expected, after 30 seconds of waiting, there was no answer. So I got back in my car, and first thing I did was start texting my friend back at the restaurant. But when I looked up back to the house, this time one of the upstairs lights inside of the house was turned on. So I went back to the door and knocked once again. Only on the first knock, the door pushed open slightly. Someone had opened the door, but there was nobody standing next to the door. I pushed the door open a little more and called out hello. My voice echoed through the empty house. I was waiting to hear footsteps come to the door, but never did. Obviously, someone had to have opened the door, so if they weren't going to come to the door, I had to assume they wanted me to come in. I stepped into the house, as my shoes made the wood floor creak. I called out one more time, and this time someone replied back. I heard the words, "Aquí arriba." Now, I'm not fluent in Spanish by any means, but I knew that aquí meant here, and I knew arriba meant above, so I put 2 and 2 together and figured they said up here. There was a stairway in the middle of the hallway, so I walked over to it and stopped at the bottom step. I looked up the stairs, and all I saw at the top was an arm reached out over the ledge, doing a little stiff come here motion. I used what little Spanish skills I'd gained from middle school and said something like "Tango tu comida" as I walked up the stairs. As I got about halfway up the stairs, the arm wasn't there anymore. I got to the top looking for whoever was just standing by the ledge over the stairs. And I noticed through the tiniest amount of light that the person was now inside a bedroom with the lights off. But I didn't see the actual person. Once again, all I saw was the person's arm doing that same come here motion. It's as if anything above the person's elbow was faded to black in that room. It was such an eerie sight. I knew for certain I wasn't going in that room though. So I said firmly with confidence, "Buddy, I'm not going in there. You come out here with money or I leave." Suddenly, the arm pulled away into the darkness of the room ahead of me, and after a few seconds of standing there in silence, I was hit by a flying object. It happened so fast that it took me a few moments to realize I'd just been hit with a stiff, severed arm. It wasn't some plastic Halloween toy, it was a real arm. I ran down the stairs with the food still in my hand and got back to my car. I didn't even call my friend or my boss. I drove straight to the nearest neighboring house and rang that person's doorbell. When they answered, I told them about what their neighbor had just done to me, and the woman had the most puzzled look on her face. She said nobody's lived in that house for a year. I felt my stomach drop when those words hit me. She said she would call the police after we talked about it for a good 5 minutes. Then I went on my way back to the restaurant with the food. I explained the best I could to my boss, and he let it go. I sometimes wonder how things would have played out if I went into that room, and who or what I would have found. I used to work at Domino's. They close at 3 a.m. on weekends, and being that I was taking an off year during college at the time of the story, my boss took advantage of that and always threw me on the 9 to 3 a.m. shifts. There would always be at least 3 people working that late. One to cook the pizzas, one to take orders, and one to do any needed deliveries. This night the one cooking the pizzas was Jugg, a 28-year-old Italian guy who worked 2 jobs. He was always in a bad mood, so when he told me to deliver something, I did it without complaints. So, being a Saturday night, it wasn't uncommon to get calls for deliveries past 2 a.m. Around 2:30, I was told to deliver 2 pizzas to an address that I still vaguely remember. 27 Crocker Drive, or something close to that. I took my stupid, beat-up 2002 Honda Civic up the road for 5 minutes. The only main road that cuts through our tiny-ass town. I live in the Manchester Township area in Jersey, containing a whole lot of nothing but trees everywhere. My drive there was a dark one. After merging off the main road onto smaller roads with no streetlights, the only light that could be seen for miles were my headlights. I turned off the public road onto a dirt road with a private property sign posted outside. It seemed I'd arrived to the house I was delivering to, and suddenly I heard a bang reverberating through my car, followed by a weakened sense of handling of my car, as well as a repeating flopping sound. I knew for certain I just got a flat tire. I stopped the car at once and got out to confirm. The front right tire was completely flat. I could see through the headlights that the house was walking distance from my car though. So instead of calling my insurance company, it would make more sense to deliver the pizza and also ask that person for help. I got to the deck of the house. It was an average size house, completely enclosed by trees, as were most of the houses around here. The lights were on inside, but all the blinds were shut. I rang the bell, and quickly a normal-looking young man answered the door. Before exchanging the pizzas for money, I told the man about the predicament I just found myself in. A look of concern came over his face as he handed me the money and I handed him the pizzas. He came outside to take a look at my car with me. It was a 30-second walk from the house. We got to my car and he started analyzing the tire. He said he could help me, he'd just need his tools from inside. I started questioning what I could have hit on his dirt driveway, and he yelled out to me, "Don't worry about it," as I was walking down his road. I walked a bit further, kind of ignoring him, when I noticed a spike strip in the road. A very small one, but undoubtedly what I hit. I couldn't see any other reason for that to be there, other than him putting it there deliberately. I started thinking over the possibilities of what could be going down, so I pretended I didn't see the spike strip and walked back saying I didn't find anything. He looked at me. I was worried he might have been suspicious. But then he turned away and said he was going inside to get some tools. God only knows what he meant by tools. I waited for him to get to his front door before I got back in my car, turned the car on, and threw it in reverse. I was not sticking around there to find out what he was doing. I heard the flat tire wobble on the dirt road as my car slowly rolled in reverse. I made a point of avoiding the spike strip this time. My car pulled out of the private dirt road onto the concrete road. I took one last look down the man's driveway to make sure he wasn't following me, and I took off. I couldn't drive too fast though, and risk of damaging my wheel. I stayed at a steady 10 to 15 miles per hour. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw something behind my car. the man running after my car. I had no choice but to step on it, forcing me to cringe as I could literally feel the damage being done to my wheel. The distance between my car and the man got greater until he was out of sight. After turning back onto the one main road that I'd mentioned earlier, I slowed down the speed a little bit, back to 10 to 15. It was a long ride back, about 20 minutes since I had to drive slow. When I got back, the place would be closing in 10 minutes, but I had to return the Domino's sign that they make us put on our cars when doing deliveries. Jeff was upset with me that I took so long, until I told him the whole story. The woman who was also working the same shift as us listened in with a look of shock on her face the whole time. When time came to close, Jeff told me I should just drive home slow since I live like down the block, and that I should take care of it tomorrow. The two went off to their cars and drove away. I sat in my car for a little bit, thinking. Eventually I turned my car on and started my slow drive back to my house. I noticed, however, that a car without its lights on was following close behind me for a while. So I pulled over in front of some small house to see if they would do the same. The car passed me, but then pulled over on the same side of the street a little further down. I started to panic, knowing it had to be the man, who figured that he'd find me at the Domino's that he ordered from. I couldn't lead him to my house, so even though I didn't know for certain if it was him, I had to be overly paranoid and call the cops. I had police come to my exact location for fear of being followed. After 5 to 10 minutes of waiting, a cop car slowly rolled down the street, and I beeped my horn to stop him. He stopped in reverse so that his windows were lined up with mine, and then we both rolled them down. I pointed at the car in front of me with its lights off, sitting a little further in front of me. But just then, that car zoomed out from its parked position, lights still off, instantly disappearing down the road into the night. The cop put his lights on and sped after him without saying a word. I didn't know if he wanted me to follow him, but I couldn't with my tire. So I drove home as quick as I could and parked my car in the driveway. I still don't know if that cop caught that driver. Somehow I doubt it, but I like to imagine he did. Either way, I always made sure to watch my back every time I drove home after that night, and I quit that job 2 months later. Abandoned mental hospital in our town is always infested with rowdy teenagers drinking, graffitiing, and making a mess with silly strings. Eventually the town caught wind of it, and one particular Halloween, when my friends Ryan, Carl, and I wanted to go exploring, apparently the town barred off every window on the first floor of the building. Security of the perimeter was also ramped up drastically. We found out the hard way after cutting through the woods and seeing security telling the mob of teens to go home. We didn't give up there though. We snuck around the perimeter through the woods to another side with no people. Then we hopped the fence and started looking for a way in. That's when we found out that all the windows had been barricaded with carbon steel bars. We heard commotion all around us, but managed to stay under the radar. We didn't want to give up though. Through our determination to find a way in, Rye spotted one window that wasn't boarded up with steel, but rather wood planks. We all had boots on, so kicking the plank in seemed plausible. However, the window was simply too high to kick up at, so Carl and I lifted Rye and actually used him and his boots as a sort of battering ram. The wood was wet and apparently rotted, so it actually snapped rather easily. After that, we simply ripped off the remainder of wood, and boom, we had our way in. We had to hurry though, before security might see. We gave Rye a boost up since he's the shortest. Then Carl and I leaped up to the ledge and squeezed in. There was junk and debris everywhere. So I took some long, flat piece of wood and covered the window with it to hide our way of entry. After that, we were all alone in a giant abandoned sideboard to explore on Halloween. Carl brought a few cans of spray paint in his backpack that we planned to use. First, we had to find a good spot to use them. Carl also brought 3 flashlights for us since, of course, it was pitch black in there. It was also weird stepping out from the cold, windy outside with the commotion and yelling going on to a scarily dead, silent interior. We planned on going to the top to possibly get to the roof, so So we looked around for the stairs, going through the dead, silent hallways. It really seemed like we were the only ones who found a way inside. We eventually found the stairs and climbed like 10 half flights of stairs to, I guess, the 6th floor. However, there was one more floor, the roof level, but the stairs in the hall we were in didn't lead up there. So we had to begin our search for the separate stairs to the roof level. As we were in a long, creepy corridor, there was suddenly a huge dome down the hall. We all aimed our flashlights down there, but the hallway was too long to truly see anything all the way down there. Apparently we weren't the only ones in this building. We tried to stay clear just in case there was security, so we went the opposite direction. We checked the whole hallway, then we turned down some intersecting hallway area. I was in the back, so I would occasionally just glance behind me, just because it was a dark, abandoned building. A little after turning the corner, there was a crack in a piece of wood behind me. I turned since I was the only one to seem to notice it. Right there was someone peeking their head from around the corner, looking at us. But when I noticed them, they disappeared down the other hall. I called out, "Yo!" I'm not really sure if it was directed to my friends, to the person I just saw, or both. My friend stopped and looked back. We went back to the corner where the halls intersected to look down that other hallway, but the guy I saw wasn't there. My friends didn't know whether I was joking or not, but at least now I knew we weren't alone there. Eventually, we came to a part of the hall where 90% of the floor was missing, minus a very small strip still left intact. Rye insisted we were going over that, and volunteered to go first. After looking down the hole and realizing it wasn't that much of a drop, I was okay with it. I dropped into what appeared to be a bathroom, or at least what once was a bathroom. Across, we pressed up the front of our shoes to the wall and grabbed onto a pipe that ran up the upper wall as support. I crossed last, and 2 friends apparently didn't wait for me, because they disappeared down the hall as I called for them to wait. I then slowly started to cross the extremely narrow bridge between the 2 sides of the hole, and suddenly, I felt something grab the back of my shoe. At first, I thought it was one of my friends messing with me, but that didn't make sense. They couldn't have gotten down there so quickly. I had no free hands to be holding my flashlight, though. My friends were already gone down the hall, so I was almost in complete darkness and couldn't see who or what was trying to pull me down into that hole. I screamed for my life, so loud it could probably be heard throughout the building. My friends came rushing back, and as light once again poured into the hole, the grip on my leg was released, and then there was a sound of running from down below. We didn't try to go down there and fight the guy. We didn't even look down there to see how he could have reached me or if he was even still there. I just forced my friends to come with me all the way down the stairs back to the first floor. But now we had another problem. We forgot how we got in. There was only that one window which wasn't barred up with steel, and we blocked it with wood. We were looking around in a hurry because of what happened. Nobody would play a joke like that. It felt like we were navigating a maze down there on the first floor, looking for that stupid window. Every corner we turned, I was afraid we were going to see that face, appearing from another corner. And it happened. Since I was now the one leading the 3 of us, I was the first to see it. At the end of the hall we were running down, there was that person, hiding half his body behind the wall. This time, as opposed to last time, however, I could actually see that he was wearing a mask. Is it the same person who tried grabbing me through that hole? I don't know. I still don't doubt it. We turned the other way and ran. We didn't stop running until we finally found that window we entered through. Finding out was easier than climbing in. By the time we got outside, it seemed most of the commotion going on outside was gone. Security seemed to have picked most of the people off the premises. We could have found a security guard and warned them of the potential psychopath in the building, but that would risk us getting busted. So instead, we ran back through the woods to the car. For the rest of the night, we hung out in a parking lot. That was our 2016 Halloween. When I was 9 years old, my parents let me go trick-or-treating without them for the first time ever. I went with my best friend at the time, Mikey, who was also 9. We were to be back home by 9 o'clock the latest, though. I think it was getting close to that point when we were still out trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating was a little worse in our town because properties were so big, so it meant more walking for less candy. We came to one house, which sat on a corner and was isolated by a set of tall bushes. He rang the bell as usual. I still remember it all so clearly. You're about to find out just why that is, though. An older man opens the door, probably in his mid-50s, thin grayish hair and a mustache. He asks what our costumes are, talks down to us like we're 6 instead of 9. He asked us if we were with anyone else, and seemed surprised that our parents weren't with us. Then he opened the door completely, to reveal some kind of obstacle course tunnel he'd set up in his living room. It was made of cardboard boxes and Halloween decorations. Admittedly, a bit cool, and then he said in order to get our candy we'd have to make it through the obstacle course. It was very tempting. Mikey and I looked at one another and said okay. The man told us to come in, but he didn't look at us as he said it. Instead we looked outside as he slowly shut the door. We crawled into that tunnel made out of boxes first, and Mikey followed after. It was really dark inside of this tunnel, since the man had only some dim orange Halloween lights on in the room. There were fake spider webs and other Halloween toys scattered throughout the box tunnel. It was actually really big and well put together, because we struggled to find the way to the other end. But when we did, it led to a small room, also lit up by orange Halloween lights. There was a note in this room, pointing to a door, saying, "Candy down there." Mikey went to open the door, revealing stairs to the basement. There was more orange light down there. The man was nowhere to be seen though. Me and Mikey started making our way down the stairs, and when we got to the bottom, we saw nothing but a big, empty basement. Then, the door above us slammed shut. We went back up the stairs to try and open it, but it was locked. We didn't know what to do other than cry for help, so we stopped when we heard the doorbell ring upstairs. It rang repeatedly, actually. We listened by the basement door to hear anything, and we heard what sounded like the front door opening, so we started screaming at the top of our lungs. There was a commotion outside the basement, like 2 men yelling at each other, before the door in front of us unlocked and opened. A man and woman came up to us. The woman hugged us and told us to follow them out of the house. We followed the couple through the living room, passing the man in the corner of his room, standing over his freakish creation. The husband called the man a sick freak as we left the house. The couple took us to their house, where the husband called the cops and the wife stayed with us, asking questions like what the man said to get us inside of his house. Apparently, they had seen us go into the man's house because they live across the street. The cops arrived, and there was an overwhelming amount of evidence for him to be arrested and tried. Of course, at the age of 9, we didn't understand the depth of the situation, but looking back now, we're all happy that those neighbors came to our rescue, and justice was served that night. Halloween has been my least favorite holiday ever since I graduated college and got my own place. I hated the idea of strangers coming up to my house with their kids and asking for candy all day, but I dealt with it with a smile on my face. My property is big, but it doesn't have any fences, and times in the past I'd seen kids fight each other with silly string in my yard. I've even had kids teepee and silly string my house. One year though, late at night, past the hours where the bulk of trick-or-treaters were out, I got another ring from the doorbell, and my dog Mika started going crazy and barking as she had been doing all day. I opened the door to a person in a full-body gorilla costume, only the face of the gorilla was freaky looking. It was a costume made to look scary. I didn't say trick-or-treat, I just held up a small plastic bag that was filled with some candies. Not a lot. Since it was close to the end of the night and I had a lot of candy left, I dumped a lot of it into his bag and waved goodbye. He didn't speak any words to me though, as he just stood on my stoop, slowly going through the bag, looking at the candies I just gave him. As I shut the door halfway, I stopped and continued to watch him as he looked up to me, but didn't say anything. I asked if he wanted more. He didn't shake his head or respond or anything. He kept looking at me weirdly, so I just shut the door and locked it. I wasn't in the mood to be playing games. Plus, what he was doing was extremely unsettling. I went back downstairs to my den to continue watching the movie that I had on. That's when I heard something fall outside. The back door was right next to my couch. So I got back up and took like 5 steps to look outside. With the back patio light on, I could see a rake that had been leaning on a pole had fallen. Given how I left it sitting, it was weird for it to have fallen on its own. Being Halloween, I did feel the need to go out and investigate. I threw on my slides and went outside to pick up the rake first of all. It was not windy out at all, so it shouldn't have fallen on its own. And I noticed the door to my shed was cracked open. I have a huge shed in my backyard that I store all of my outdoor equipment in. I went over to take a look inside. As big as the shed is, the lights haven't worked in there for years. So I had to use the light from my phone screen on full brightness as a flashlight of sorts. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I certainly wasn't expecting to find a gorilla mask sitting on a big box. I knew right away. The light from the phone screen only traveled so far, but I still dared walk further into the shop until I saw him in the corner. There was the person in the gorilla suit, and now he had his mask on. I stepped a little closer and realized he was facing the wall, just standing motionless. He was also not a kid, rather some old, terrifying-looking man. I didn't know if he heard or saw me yet, so I started backing away slowly. Even though I didn't make a sound, his head suddenly turned to face me. It nearly made me shit myself or have a heart attack. I ran back outside and slammed the shed door shut behind me. I then ran back to my back house door and heard the door to the shed open with a lot of force. I didn't look back, just went inside and locked the grate. Then, of course, I called the police to report a trespasser on my property. It figures, however, by the time the cops arrived, the guy in the gorilla suit was gone, mask and all. All they could do was assure me they'd be on the lookout for someone in a gorilla suit. Then they went on their way. After that, I didn't have much interest in finishing the movie, so I went upstairs and called it a night. That night in bed, I did wake up to Mika barking downstairs though, so I left my room to see where she was. She was in the den, by the back door, barking ferociously. I took a quick look outside, without letting Mika out with me, but I didn't see anyone, and the shed door was still shut. Still, I felt creeped out being out in that yard that night, so I hurried back in and brought Mika up to sleep in my room with me. I fell asleep, not without hearing Mika yelling slightly occasionally, which freaked me out a lot. The next morning and ever since, life has been completely normal. And that was by far the scariest Halloween I've ever had. I was watching TV in our sunroom, which is like a smaller living room type space, which we use as a TV and movie room. There was also a door to the side driveway in this room. I had all the blinds shut and was under a blanket watching some random movie I don't even remember, and out of nowhere the lights turned on outside. We have a motion sensing light out there, and the fact that it turned on was concerning. I had to lower the volume on the TV to listen up for any possible sounds. It was unlikely I'd hear anything from outside though. I lifted the blinds briefly just to do a quick check. It was clear. There was no way that I know if to shut off that light, so as annoying as it was, I just had to leave. I figured it was a raccoon or a possum or something that might have triggered the light. Though the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. So I put on my shoes and just walked around the driveway to ease my mind. No one was there, so I could go back to watching TV with a clear head. Some time passed, and I suddenly heard a bucket full of something fall over outside, and the motion sensing light turned back on. The first time it happened, I was concerned, but now I was straight up scared. Someone or something was out there. I was hoping it was an animal, and I really started to doubt it. I didn't want to get up because the couch was actually the only blind spot from the door inside. I had a fear of getting up and seeing somebody standing at that door. I wanted to shut the TV now. The remote was in the middle of the coffee table, and I was afraid to even move that much. I looked to the blinds, which were fully pulled shut. However, I wasn't looking at the blinds. I I was looking at what I saw through the blinds. There was a perfect outline of a person standing on the other side, with their arms stretched out a bit from their body. I don't know how to describe in writing how I felt in that moment. There was an intense feeling in my heart and stomach area. I felt like it was harder to breathe. That's how scared I was. I got up from the couch as quietly as I could, but before I could even get to the door that separates the sunroom and the dining room, the person on the other end started knocking aggressively on the window. I wanted to scare them away somehow. I was too scared to go out there, so I screamed in a shaky voice, calling the cops. I stood by the doorway for a second to see if they stopped. They did. I saw the shadow beyond the blinds move towards the door. I saw some old, crazy-looking woman with wiry hair on the other side of the door. In a moment, I felt less intimidated. So she started banging on the glass of my door with both hands, screaming as if she were mental. I slammed the door to the sunroom and called 911. I reported some crazy, mental old woman attempting to break into my house. I was told to wait in a safe locked room with a weapon to defend myself until the police arrived. Any nightmare I ever had about a break-in came true when I heard glass shattering outside of the bathroom. I waited a minute after not hearing anything to slowly and quietly unlock and open the bathroom door. I peered into my living room, and there she was, the old woman with the wiry hair, standing in the middle of my living room in front of a broken window. She spotted me when I had the door open and came rushing over to the door. I screamed like the scared 17-year-old I was and slammed the door shut again. The old woman started knocking on the door and wouldn't stop. She was saying things under her breath on the other side, and I couldn't make out any of it. I was too busy crying and begging her to go away. I finally heard a bang at the front door, so I opened the bathroom window and screamed help. 2 cops came up to the window I was screaming through, and I begged them to crawl through the broken window out back. They assured me they'd be okay and they'll be right here. The knocking at the door stopped, and a sudden commotion was taking place outside. I heard the 2 cops scream at the woman to step away from the door. When I stepped out from the bathroom, the 3 cops had the insane woman detained. Imagine they did it pretty easily. The woman looked at me with a look of crazy in her eyes, and I looked away. It turned out the old woman lived in a nearby house with some woman who never left the house. None of the neighbors ever really see her. The old woman was messed up in multiple ways and belonged in some kind of special care place. My parents pressed charges on the younger woman because they felt as her supposed caretaker, she should have been held liable for allowing a mentally disabled person to break into someone else's house. Sadly, my parents lost the lawsuit, but the old, crazy woman was out of our neighborhood at the very least, and was put in some kind of treatment center. I own a small house on a big property in the rural part of New York, and I go up there a bunch of times a year in the winter months to go skiing. There's a neighbor up there that I'd never spoken to once. There's a fence that separates our 2 yards. Then on the other sides of my house is woods for miles. There's another neighbor further down the road, across the street, and I'd met him a number of times because he happens to go skiing too, so we got to know each other based off that. I went up this past January for the first time in the season. As I walked up to the front door, I heard a kid laughing nearby in the neighbor's house's direction. I figured they had kids, which was news to me. Stepping into the house for the first time each season was always weird. A house that would be empty for a majority of the year, so I'd have to turn on the water and heat and everything, of course. The first night, I slept like a baby after the 4-hour drive from Connecticut. The next morning, after eating breakfast and changing into my ski gear, I went outside and found a big red ball sitting in the snow on my front lawn. It wasn't there the day before, so I assumed it belonged to the neighbors. I took the ball and threw it over the fence separating our properties. And I went off to the ski lodge to meet my friend, and we spent the day skiing. When I got back, it was dark out. I'd eaten dinner with my friend, so I was ready to go to bed. Walking to the front door, I noticed that once again, a big red ball was sitting on my front lawn. I knew it was getting a bit odd. Once again, I threw that red ball over the fence. I woke up in the middle of that night to laughing outside. Kids laughing. It was like 2 or 3 a.m. A kid playing outside made no sense. I went to look out my window. couldn't see any kids there, and all the laughter had stopped. However, I did see something sitting on my front lawn. I couldn't tell from the window, so I went outside into the snow in my slippers and robe, and saw that red ball once again sitting in the snow. I got chills as I saw it in the same spot once again. I took the ball, and this time instead of throwing it over the fence, I brought it inside my house. I went back to sleep, not hearing any laughter outside again that night. The next morning, before going skiing again, I walked over to the neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and finally introduced myself. Surprisingly, he was an elderly man who seemed completely innocent. I questioned the child's laughter I kept hearing, and the ball that kept ending up on my lawn. He told me there were no kids around there. I got chills again. I thanked him, shook his hand, and went back to my house. I left the red ball in my living room, then drove back up the mountain and had another day of skiing with my friend. When I got back to the house that night, I was completely exhausted and ready to go home the next day. I threw all my stuff on the couch and figured I'd pack it all up tomorrow. I literally crashed into the bed as my whole body was sore, and I fell asleep like a baby. Except I woke up to a kid's laughter outside again. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window to look outside. There was the red ball, sitting in the snow again. I ran to the living room and tore the room upside down looking for the ball. I still know to this day I'd left it in there when I left, but it wasn't there now. I suddenly didn't feel alone in the house. I turned on every light as I packed up all my wet gear into my bag. I threw everything in the bag so I'd be ready to go if shit hit the fan. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and they were, so it made no sense. I left the lights on and went back to my room, shutting off only those lights. I looked out the window, and far behind the red ball, out in the snow, was what looked like a kid. A kid just standing stiff, looking towards my window. I ducked down and closed the blinds. I closed the blinds to every window in my house. I tried my best to just go to sleep and ignore it. It was a long hour before my exhaustion overcame my fear and I fell asleep. I woke up the next morning, skipped breakfast, packed up the car,
Moi, c'est le channel avec frère, je l'ai en boucle.
Classique.
Ouais, c'est la Wonder. Parce que je trade pas et on a des patchs.
Mais j'ai que 3 armes en dessous de 20 d'average et encore elles sont à 19, voire
J'ai
au
tellement simple à
18.
deux, frère.
Comment ça se